You're listening to the Morphology Podcast. Thanks for tuning in to the Morphology Podcast, aka Murph here to share interviews about biking experiences from cyclists who have pedaled to places all over. Each week we will get to know new people and explore new destinations to ride your bike. As you listen to these adventures, you may wonder, why haven't I done that yet? Becky Furuta is on the podcast this week. This busy mother of two currently juggles being a pro cycling athlete for Team Noro Nordisk and a diabetes ambassador. And when she's not racing her bike, Furuta is caring for her children and serving as the owner and sports vision specialist in Golden, Colorado, and owner and co-founder of a private label eyewear company. She holds a master's degree in public health policy from the University of Colorado and works as a consultant on childhood anti-obesity and public health campaigns. In 2017, Furuta won the Colorado State Time Trial Championship, setting a new course record. And in 2018, she finished 6th at the Women's Professional Criterium at Colorado Classic. She has an inspiring story on how she got to where she is today. So here's my interview with Becky. And action. All right, well, on the podcast today, we have Becky Furuta. Hey, Becky.
Hey, how are you?
I am good. So here we are coming to you live. Well, we're recording this live. Actually, we'll edit all the bad parts out. But we are coming to the listeners from Coralville, Iowa, which is not where you're from, right?
No, I'm not from Iowa.
Okay, she is not from Iowa. I am from Iowa. Listeners already know that. But the reason that you're here is because we have been at a amazing cyclocross event all weekend called Jingle Cross or UCI World Cup. So what was your experience there? Did you like it?
It was amazing. I think Jingle Cross is a unique event in cyclocross racing because they throw everything into that race.
Yes.
A lot of cyclocross races have technical features, and this race really has everything. It's got a sand pit, it's got a mud pit, it's got a run up, it's got, the railroad ties, it's
and the huge Mount Crumpet,
Mount Crumpet, and then it's got a ton of community involvement, and people are supportive of the race, and it was a fantastic experience, and they attract truly the best riders in the world.
World class.
Yeah. It was amazing.
It was so cool. Yeah. And then on top of that, there's gravel everywhere. So we are sitting in a hotel lobby. So you may hear some background noise, but all of us are full of grit and sweat and all the things. And I should point out, we're also drinking Prosecco.
Yes.
Out of a styrofoam cup.
That's true.
So Becky and I have spent the weekend together. So now we're besties, just drinking out of styrofoam cups.
Just having a good time in Iowa.
Yeah. And I should mention, we talked about being at Jingle Cross and UCI World Cup, but you yourself are a pro cyclist, and you were able to do a race this weekend.
I did. I did the gravel race for Jingle Cross, which is the inaugural race. They've never done a gravel event here before. And, it was kind of difficult for them to plan the route because one thing about gravel is it's only gravel if it's dry. And if you get a lot of rain, it quickly becomes mud, which is a very different riding condition. And they had more rain in 48 hours in Iowa City than they had in the prior 6 months.
Yeah.
So they kept having to redraw that course map and redo those course lines. They had some construction that popped up at the last moment. So we didn't actually get the course profile until 10 o'clock the night before.
Oh, man.
And it's really hard to plan for what that race is going to look like. They didn't have any elevation for us, so we had no idea how much we'd be climbing. But it was a super fun event.
Yeah.
We had a great time. Again, attracted a lot of really strong riders. I was riding with Kristen Lagan for a while, who is really well known in gravel cycling and has a lot of good races behind her belt and usually really good results. And so it was a tough day, but it was a lot of fun. Yeah.
And I thought it was funny after you got done with your race, we're sitting at our booth talking, and you said something about, I think so, they said the elevation was going to be whatever, 1,500 or 1,400.
Yeah.
And tell the listeners what the elevation really was.
They estimated it at 1,730, I think,
Okay.
which for 70 miles is nothing. That's actually a pretty flat course. And so I was excited because I don't climb well. And my final elevation was just under 5,000 feet.
That is not cool.
Yeah, it was a little off. And actually, it was funny because while I was riding it, Colorado climbing is a little different. We have these kind of steady low grades, like 2.5%, 3.5%. This was really punchy climbs. I mean, there were, 9, 10% grades in there. They're shorter, but they're harder. And so I was like, well, maybe I'm just not used to this kind of climbing. Maybe it's more to do with the type of climbing I'm doing, but this feels like a lot more than 1,700 feet. And when I got done, I was like, yeah, that was quite a difference.
5,000 is a lot of,
it was a lot.
A huge difference, especially, you're not doing 300 miles.
No,
Right.
no, it was 70 miles and over, gravel roads, pea gravel, again, like in Colorado. And gravel is interesting because gravel racing is really anything that's not tarmac.
Yeah.
And so it was a lot of pea gravel, not this nice, slick, clean dirt that I'm used to. And then we went off on these B roads, and we don't have B roads from where I'm from. So I didn't know what that meant at the start. And I quickly learned that is just basically an unmaintained farm road. And those, they had told us at the start line, were almost impassable by bike, and that was not an exaggeration. I mean, those are some crazy, crazy roads. But we all got through it. It was a lot of fun. I mean, it was challenging. It was definitely, they said at the start, this is going to be a hard course, and they weren't kidding. It definitely, Jingle Cross, everything about Jingle Cross is hard, and it totally lived up to the expectations.
Awesome. And were you happy with finishing, how you finished and all that good stuff?
Yeah, so I got the results today, and
good.
I was in 5th in the women's elite field, which is great. That's a good result for that much climbing.
Yeah, that is awesome. Very awesome. Okay, so you mentioned elite, and I alluded a little bit to the fact that you have been a pro cyclist for a long time. Do you want to get into that? Like, how did you go from, well, I don't know what your childhood and high school, but most people have a bike when they're in high school, and then life changes. They either go to school or they move out of their parents' house, and then there's no biking until you're a grown-up. So what's your story? A quick interruption to give a shout out to Primalwear. Cycling is their passion and apparel is their craft. So if you're in the market for a new jersey, bibs, mask, or any cycling apparel, go to primalwear.com and use code PRIMALMURPH to get 20% off your purchase. Yes, 20% off. Now back to the show.
So I did not set out in life to be a professional cyclist.
Yeah.
In fact, I'd never watched a professional bike race. I'm not even sure I was aware that professional cycling was a thing.
Oh.
It's not a big sport in America. I probably as a teenager had heard of the Tour de France, but I certainly had never seen it, even on television. So it was something that was really distanced from me. I grew up in this old Victorian farmhouse just outside of Boulder, Colorado.
Oh, nice.
And my dad was a tax attorney. My mom was a high school English teacher. And they were fairly well off. And I think from the outside looking in, it looked like this kind of idyllic, great family environment. Internally, there was actually quite a bit of strife. My dad was kind of a volatile guy. He had a notoriously bad temper. None of us were very close with him. My mother got pregnant with my youngest sister when she was 48 years old. And my mother had been actually morbidly obese her entire life. The earliest photos I have of my mother are at age 2 and 3. And she was already, by any standard definition, clinically obese at that point in her life. And that really shaped her personality. It made her... She was very ashamed of her size, and I think a lot of women actually feel that kind of discomfort with their bodies, and she felt judged by that. And it made her very anxious. It made her really introverted. And, it really... as a kid, I can remember her doing all these crazy crash diets. Like she did like the cabbage soup diet in the 80s. And all these like crazy things to try and lose weight. And she could just never maintain it. So by the time she became pregnant at 48, she was very large. She had all of the classic kind of comorbidities that you see. She had hypertension. She had high cholesterol. She actually had type 2 diabetes, but it had gone undiagnosed until pregnancy.
Oh, wow.
And her blood sugar was largely out of control. And so it became a very complicated pregnancy very quickly. And they thought she was 32 weeks along and decided that they needed to induce her. They took her into the hospital, did the induction. She almost did not survive.
Wow.
And my youngest sister was actually delivered at about 1.5 pounds.
Oh,
so
wow.
she was much, much earlier than what they had expected. But again, it was hard to guess the gestational age of the baby because of all of my mother's other health considerations. So they took my youngest sister by helicopter to Children's Hospital in Denver. My mom remained in the hospital for some time and continued to actually deteriorate. My father ultimately took her to the Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale, Arizona. Oh, wow. My dad at the time did not have health insurance because this is pre-ACA. So my mom, because of all of her pre-existing conditions, was not able to get insurance in the United States. So my father had to pay all of those medical bills out of pocket, and it was millions of dollars. A baby in a neonatal intensive care unit for a month, and my mother in the Mayo Clinic for a month. It racked up pretty quickly. And so my father lost everything overnight. He lost his business, he lost his house, his life savings, he lost his, cars, all of it. My mother ultimately was diagnosed with cardiomyopathy, which is a heart condition related to elevated blood glucose for an extended time horizon. And they told her at that time she probably had 5 or 6 years to live, sent her back home. My youngest sister did survive. She's actually 27 now. She's in graduate school at
cool,
NYU, and ended up perfectly healthy. But it took a long time to get her there. When she came home, she was on an oxygen heart rate monitor. My mom was still critically ill, so I had to get up every morning and I'd give her this dropper of caffeine to get her heart going, to make sure that her heart didn't stop. And while my mom was hospitalized for a while, I was in a hotel room in Scottsdale, Arizona with this infant on a heart rate monitor, my 7-year-old sister. My older sister was off in Europe. And I remember being really terrified that if something happened with my baby sister, that I would be blamed. It was a really tough time. My dad ultimately decided that the best hope to recover us financially was for him to move to the western slope of Colorado, find a job, get settled, and we would just wait until the bank came and seized the house. And so we did. We stayed in this Victorian farmhouse until the bank showed up and put padlocks on the door. We got in the cars and we drove to meet my dad. And I actually did not understand we were homeless. I did not get that until we showed up at the motel. Wow. And it was the Will Rogers Motel, which is this teeny tiny motel between Montrose and Ridgeway, Colorado. It had bars on the windows. It was, 1 room, 2 beds, little tiny kitchenette next to a checks cashed place and a truck stop. Not a great place to be. Definitely different from this Victorian farmhouse I'd grown up in. And I remember sitting down on the bed, and there was no box spring. It's just this thin mattress on a wire frame. And I will tell you, as an adult, I have never gone into a hotel room and not laid down in the hotel bed and thought, I'm glad this has a box spring, because it was awful. It was so hard to sleep there. And my mom was really depressed. My older sister was really depressed. My father chose not to enroll us in school because he didn't know if he would ultimately settle there. And so for 6 months, that was what my world looked like.
That was life.
Yeah,
every day you're in a hotel and the whole family's in there.
With all of these people in crisis. And I just couldn't take it. And I was 15, 16 years old. And I had an old Huffy mountain bike that my dad had bought me when I was in the 4th grade. And by day 2, I got up in the morning and got on that Huffy mountain bike and just started riding. I would just point it in a direction and go. And I was in no hurry to come home because there was nothing to come back to.
Right.
And so I would just ride. And the thing about western slope of Colorado is it's just amazingly beautiful. It's got the Dallas Divide. I rode as a kid what they call the $1 Million Highway, which is this tiny, thin strip of tarmac. And it drops off to about 10,000 feet on either side. And I later learned as an adult, I was flipping through Outside magazine probably 5-6 years ago. It's one of the top 10 most dangerous roads in the world.
Oh, geez.
But I had
and
no
you were
idea.
doing it as a teenager.
Yeah, just out there riding my bike. And I would ride up. They grow all these stone fruits for fruit wine, cherries and peaches and things like that. So I'd ride up to these mesas and I would steal fruit off of the trees and shove it in my pockets. And I'd ride my bike and eat fruit. And I did that every day for 6 months. And I just fell in love with it. what had started off as a crisis became this just amazing adventure on a bicycle. And that was where I felt most at home.
Yeah.
It was where I was happiest. I felt empowered. Things would go wrong. You learn to wrap a spoke. You learn to change a tire. And that is empowering. You learn to manage all of these little crises that arise, and you actually figure out you don't need other people to do that. And at this point in my life where I had these major crises, that was actually a really reassuring thing. And I just never stopped riding. I didn't get a driver's license until I was 27. I probably should not have one now. I'm a terrible driver. But yeah, I mean, that's just what I did. And I biked my way through college. I ended up going to school in part on a cycling scholarship.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Started.
So obviously, besides the fact that you were using biking as like therapy for yourself and you were empowering yourself, you obviously were good at it if you ended up getting a scholarship.
I was. The first time I learned to race was at the University of Colorado at Boulder, which is where my master's degree is from. And again, I was started off on like an academic scholarship and eventually earned my way into a full cycling scholarship. But when I first started, I was just doing the intramural cycling team, still with the same bike I had in the fourth grade. I mean, it was that Huffy.
The Huffy?
The Huffy from my fourth grade. Because I didn't have any
probably
means.
weighed as much as you did.
Yeah, my power to weight ratio was really bad. But I didn't have anything else, so I had this Huffy mountain bike. And someone said, you're really good. If you had a real bike, you could really race and do well. But, a race bike was just unobtainable. I could barely pay for college, let alone, a bicycle. So I would borrow bikes, and no one wants to give you their $10,000 carbon fiber race bike.
Right.
So I would get these old steel bikes. They were oftentimes the wrong size, different geometry, not set up for me. And I would show up at the start line with kit that didn't match. And, you can see people looking around, sizing up the other riders,
sure.
and everyone would look at me and be like, well, we don't have to worry about her. She's going to be
off
the bat.
And then you're like, watch me.
And
you watch.
I would just bury myself. I would just go and I would bury myself and I would win the race, and consistently was winning. Eventually got the cycling scholarship, still raced on borrowed bikes until 2005 when I graduated from the University of Colorado. And at that time I was offered my first sponsorship, and that was with Title IX Women's Racing. I got a bike, I got a kit, I got all the equipment, and I thought, I have made it.
You're like, yes.
I've gotten there. This is it. And I raced for them for a few years, and then went out on a training ride one day, thought I was doing okay, thought I felt pretty good, but I could not keep up. And I kept dropping off the back. I felt terrible about halfway through. I mean, I felt physically sick. And I went home and I filled up a water bottle, drank an entire bottle of water, like 20 ounces of water, filled up another water bottle, drank that. I was filling that water bottle up for the third time. And you should know here that my degree is in public health. And I immediately realized that
something's wrong.
People don't drink that much water. And I knew I had diabetes. And so I called my doctor. I was also pregnant. My husband and I were expecting our second child. And so I called my doctor and said, I think I have pregnancy-induced diabetes. And it turned out that I had type 1.
Wow.
Yeah.
So is it the same thing that it had been happening for a while and you didn't know? Or was that kind of the catalyst?
I mean, I think it was, in retrospect, I mean, it's hard because I was pregnant and so many things are going on in pregnancy.
Sure.
I was peeing all the time, but you're pregnant. I was tired all the time, but you're pregnant. So a lot of the symptoms are kind of masked, and I was really active. So I was probably keeping my blood sugar, low, which is good, which is healthier, just through activity until eventually my body just wasn't making enough insulin to even keep that as an effective management tool. And at that point, I think it became more pronounced. But yeah, I didn't tell anyone for a long time. I was like a closet diabetic for a long time, mostly because I just felt I didn't want to be stigmatized. I'd grown up.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd grown up in poverty, which was stigmatizing. I was the same kid when I lived in this beautiful Victorian farmhouse that I was when I lived in the Will Rogers Motel. But the way people treated me, the stories they told me about who I was and what I could do and who I could become, they were very different all of a sudden. And I just didn't want to tackle anything else that I felt like was going to be stigmatizing. And I really was afraid of losing that cycling contract. And ultimately I did. Ultimately, when I made that disclosure, they felt like I was a liability and chose not to renew the contract.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which was tough. That was tough.
Wow. But we both know that it turned into an amazing opportunity if you want to go into...
It turned out better than I ever could have expected.
Yeah.
I actually, after I was diagnosed, I went to my first doctor and asked her how I could continue racing, and she told me I could not. She said,
Really?
she was like, your professional cycling career is done. There is absolutely no way you can do this. She suggested I take up Tai Chi. And if you know me, I am not someone who should take up Tai Chi. I don't have that. No one would describe me as like calm and methodical. And so I was like, no, I don't. I'm not sure that's a fit. I actually fired her on the spot. I was like, you know what? Our goals don't align. I'm going to find somebody
who tells me I can continue being a professional
somebody
cyclist.
who can work this out. And I did. I actually found a fantastic doctor in Denver, got me through the whole pregnancy, encouraged me to keep riding. He's like, it's great for you. It's great for your baby. My daughter was healthy at birth. She was totally, because a lot of times if you have diabetes during pregnancy, one of the risk factors is have a very large baby. My daughter was 7 pounds, 8 ounces, like perfectly average size, totally healthy at delivery. She is now no longer average size. She is 13 and 6 feet tall.
Oh, jeez.
But I don't think that is in any way related to type 1 diabetes. So that all turned out. And I was released from my contract. And, I took a couple years off anyway. I mean, I had a 2-year-old.
I was going to say you had 2 small children at the time.
I had a 2-year-old son at home and a 1-year-old daughter. And actually, in that window, our son had been diagnosed with autism. So we had a lot going on.
Sure.
And then, I started kind of missing. I was still riding. Both my husband and I have always ridden bikes. And, we'd load the kids up in the Burley trailer and ride with them. And I wanted to go back to racing. And so I was in my endocrinologist's office thumbing through this magazine, and I see this article about a team who at that time had 17 riders, 6 with type 1 diabetes. And I was like, this is great. I need to reach out to these guys and see what they're doing. And so I did. I sent them a nice little letter, like asking how they were managing during races and if I could talk to one of their riders. And they came back and said, why don't you send us some information about your racing? And so I did. And they returned with, we want to offer you the opportunity to come to team training camp next month in Tucson, Arizona. And this was in October. And training camp was in November. And I said, absolutely, I'm there. Let's do this. And then I went home and told my husband that I had returned to cycling, and he was going to, be left with these 2 young kids. But he's always been totally supportive. I have to say, I've been in this sport for a long, long time, and I won the lottery when I married my husband. He is great. And so I did. I showed up at team training camp and raced that year with Team Type 1. And then a year later, the sponsorship changed. Noro Nordisk, which is a global leader in diabetes management, came up and said, we want to take over the sponsorship. But the contingency is every rider has to have type 1 diabetes.
Oh, wow.
And that was my reaction. I remember hearing that and thinking there's no possible way. We cannot find enough talented riders with this condition, people with the genetic predisposition to race at this level.
Well, especially if their doctors told them what your first doctor told you, and then they didn't get a second opinion.
And a lot of them, if they're diagnosed while they're racing, they're going to be released from contract. And there's actually a few riders on our team who have had that same experience.
Wow.
So, I thought it was just absolutely unobtainable. That was 10 years ago. Team Noro Nordisk still exists. We are the world's first professional all-diabetes professional cycling team. Yeah. And all of the riders have type 1 diabetes. It's been an incredible journey. One of my favorite stories actually of the team is my teammate David Lozano was doing Tour of Rwanda. And the day before the Queen stage, they were listening to the radio, and the commentators were talking about how we were a charity team, and the riders all had type 1, but it was really just for show, and that we weren't competitors in any true sense. And it just lit this fire in David, and he got out there and raced the race of his life. And when you see the finish line photos, David is soloing his way to a win in this race, and you cannot even see anyone behind him. He is so far ahead.
Wow.
And it's just incredible what we've been able to do. And I think, this is sort of the story of my life. A lot of people believed in me and in these big ideas, even when I wasn't sold on it myself.
Oh, wow.
And I think that really is the lesson of Noro Nordisk. They believed in what we could do, even if we weren't 100% sure it was going to be possible.
Wow, that is such a great story. And didn't you tell me there's very few women on the team?
There are. We've had kind of, fluctuating numbers, but it's hard. I mean, it's so hard. Women represent such a small part of cycling, which is something that I would really like to change. And I think there's a lot of good work to that end. But in the United States, only about 10% of USA cycling licenses are issued to women. Oh. So, to find that pool of riders and then the group within them that have type 1 diabetes and then the group within that can race really at the top level is very, very difficult. We have created a talent pipeline. So the team runs junior development camps every year in Athens, Georgia, and they go out into the world and recruit young people from truly every country. And they recruit men and women equally. There's no gender bias. Bring those who seem to have the ability and the desire to Athens, Georgia. We have them work with our coaching staff, with our certified diabetes educators, with our medical staff, with our trainers. We do race simulations, and we really try to foster that development. And it's at little to no cost to the families. With the aim that someday these kids could be our future riders. And we actually have several guys on the professional team today who went through that talent pipeline.
That's awesome.
And it is very cool. And, we don't group riders by gender. There's no women's, the women don't go out for a ride and the men don't go out for a separate ride. It is based on ability. So we group them entirely based on their speed and their skill sets, which, even if they don't make it to the pro ranks, there's still, some of these kids come from countries where there's not a lot of equality. Yeah. There is big gender divisions for them, and to be, all of them together and have that experience creates a little bit of social change as well. So it's a really cool program.
Wow. And I didn't realize how many years you've been part of the whole pro cycling circuit. Is that the right word?
This is how I know I'm coming up to the point in my life and I need to retire. People are like, wow, that's a long time. Or I get asked that in interviews. How much longer are you going to do this? And I'm like, it's been a while.
It's something that, like, we just, witnessed the pro women. Do you call them pro women? That did the last race today?
Yeah, the World Cup race, those are all professional women. Those are truly the top of their sport.
So I don't even know if inspiring is the right word, because it's nothing that I have ever had the mindset to be on like that for, 45 minutes or 50 minutes?
Like an hour, yeah.
That's crazy. And then I think of you doing that for so many years. So, I'll do a high five in the air to you, because that's mind-blowing.
But I think it speaks to how much I love it. I thought, the first race I went to with the team was this race in Dallas, Texas, called the Matrix Challenge. And it was actually a terrible race. All of us crashed. I crashed about 500 feet out of the start line, my first race back. It was a total fiasco of a race. But, I remember getting on that plane and thinking, somebody is paying me to get on this airplane and go race my bike and do this thing I love. And it was just, I was just blown away at that moment by, like, I tell people that I live my dream, but that's not actually true, because it's beyond the scope of anything I ever could have imagined as a kid. As a 14-year-old kid, I used to cut out pictures from travel magazines when I was a kid, and I would paper my walls with all these pictures of travel magazines. And, I've seen those places, and I've seen them from the seats of my bikes. And it's just incredible to me that that's how it turned out. And I thought at that time in Dallas, Texas, I thought someday this is going to be no big deal. This is just going to be a thing I do. So I really need to appreciate this moment, because someday I'm just not going to have the same sense. And I can tell you, it's been 11 years, and I every time I get on a plane have that same sense. It hasn't worn off.
Awesome. Yeah. I thought you were going to say, like, your favorite place ever is here in Iowa, riding gravel.
No. So my friend Pat Mayben is here from Primal next to me. He knows.
We forgot to give you a shout out, Pat.
He knows.
So he's here, yes.
My favorite bike event in the world. What is my favorite bike event in the world, Pat?
I don't know. Maybe Ride the Rockies?
No, it's RAGBRAI.
Oh,
RAGBRAI. And it's because that is what cycling is supposed to be. Like, I love professional racing. Professional racing is a lot of fun, and I get to go to really cool places, and I get to do really cool things, and I get to race the fastest women on the planet. But that's not the heart and soul of cycling, That's not it. The heart and soul of cycling is something like RAGBRAI, where you have people truly from every walk of life, and they go into their garage and they dig out whatever bike they have, and they don't care if they even have a kit. You'll see these guys in jorts and T-shirts in the middle of the Iowa heat and humidity, And they are pedaling whatever bicycle they have just because they love to do it. It's fun to be out there. It's fun to be with other people. And you meet the coolest people, and all of them are self-sufficient. Everybody is ready to go.
Right.
They don't start with the intention of hopping in some sag wagon. I mean, you'll see, you see people doing crazy stuff like duct taping their wheels or whatever they have to do to hobble that way to the finish. And everyone is having just the best time.
Yeah.
And it's about food, and it's about community, and it's about bikes, and it's just about, people getting out of their house and turning off their TV and doing something that tests their limits, in some cases, like really pushes them to their limit.
Right.
There's some hard days in RAGBRAI.
Right.
And it's just an amazing, that is the heart and soul of cycling. I've said it about gravel racing. One of the reasons I love gravel racing, the front of the race is a bunch of pros. That's fun and that's great. And if you're at the front, that's a good sign. But the real race is happening at the back. The real race is happening in the middle and the back. And those are the people who lined up. They didn't even know if they were going to finish the day, but they're going to give it 100%. And they're going to try. And they're good people who are just out there, just pushing themselves to do something that's really challenging and really hard. And they've worked toward that, and they've trained for that. I mean, that's cycling. That's really what American bicycles are all about.
Yeah, I agree. And I am one of those people that will do a gravel race or a ride and be in the back. But that's where exactly what you said, the sense of community, but it's also you're at a speed that you can actually have conversations with the people around you, and they're not trying to race you. They're just like, we just got to get up this hill together. That's an 8% grade.
We've got to help each other.
And where are you from? And I like your bike and all of those. And those are the people that, just like RAGBRAI, where if you do the same ride every year, you're like, I remember you from last year, or we biked together. And I just love that sort of thing. So, but when we talk about, how much we love RAGBRAI and gravel, do you have some like memorable races that you're like, oh my gosh, I've got to tell the listeners about this one? A quick interruption to tell you this week's podcast is sponsored by Lizard Lips Lip Balm. These great lip balms contain natural ingredients, come in a variety of flavors, and you can choose certified organic or balms with sun protection. Check it out at lizardlips.net. Now back to the show.
Probably my most memorable race was I did an event in Taiwan, which
wow.
it was incredible. And I didn't know I was going until sort of the last minute, so I had no opportunity to because I always get currency to the country that I'm going to, because you just never know, if you're going to want a Coke at the airport or something. It's just easier with cash versus a card. A lot of American bank cards don't work in Asian countries, which is definitely true in Taiwan. They can't take your American chip card. So I didn't have an opportunity to get currency. I show up in Taiwan with like no access to even bottled water. I can't even go in and buy a bottle of water. And, no one speaks clear English. No one was there at the airport to pick me up. So I'm kind of wrestling through, just getting through the early days of the tour of Taiwan. And then the race starts, and all of the race cards, all of the numbers, all of the information, it's all in Mandarin. They're Mandarin characters.
Yeah.
And so I can't read anything. There's no one there to translate. We had a girl who had come to one of our junior development camps, and she was racing with me, and her name was Pei Wen, and she did not speak a drop of English. And I just kind of clung to her. I just followed her around because I was like, well, she's in the same kit. She'll at least get me through this. She'll figure it out. And there's this moment when we were racing, and we're racing through this long, long tunnel out of Tainan, and cars are coming by us at 50, 60 miles an hour. They hadn't closed down the tunnel. They're inches from you. And I am, a half inch from this girl that I don't even know her, and I'm riding her wheel.
And you can't even communicate with her to be
and
like...
And I can't communicate with her. And so I just have to trust that she's not going to do anything crazy, that she's not going to make any erratic moves, because if anyone would have crashed in there, of course, it would have been a calamity. And I was so stressed and just so panicked and so frustrated. And then there was this moment where I was like, I just need to settle in and just own this experience, right? Like I need to stop resisting and wanting it to be a certain way, and just go with it. And I just settled down and I rode with her, and that day was so hard, and we got through it. And at the finish, they'd set up these tents. You know, they don't have restaurants, so they were these huge tents. And they had this banquet like you would not believe. They were bringing out whole Dungeness crabs, and they were bringing out the best stir fry I've ever had in my entire life. Like these noodle dishes.
Yeah.
And she and I just exchanged this look. Like, this is one of those times where you just don't need words, because we were both starving and there's this amazing food. And we just both had this moment of just joy, like diving into these plates. And for the next 5 days, she and I hung out every single day, never spoke a word because we couldn't speak each other's language, but got along so well. I left her with my gloves and my bottle because they hadn't given her that stuff when she went to camp, and she was elated. And it was just this really cool experience. And I actually fell in love with the country. I love Taiwan. The people were incredibly friendly. It's a very safe city. You know, Tainan and Taipei are both super, super safe cities. The sponsors actually took me out to this beautiful dinner the last day that I was there at this Michelin star restaurant. Wow. It's like this dumpling platter. It was amazing. But everything about that was just it's such a different race experience and such a different cultural experience, but it was also just one of those times when you have to let go of expectations and just fully immerse yourself in the moment.
Wow.
And then in gravel racing, I did a race earlier this year that was just a mud fest. You know, we showed up and the race promoter was on the verge of canceling it. And he decided that the infrastructure was there. The riders showed up. He's like, let's just do it. Let's go for it. And it was like 6 inches of mud. It was freezing cold. The mud was actually freezing to our bodies. It was just a disaster. And I slogged it out. They'd reduced the course to 50 miles because there was actually lightning and thunder.
Oh my gosh.
Snow coming in.
This is everything. It's got everything.
It was the whole deal. And it was, you know, it should have been miserable, but I fell in with this group of people and we just had a great time, and we rode really hard. And I actually wound up winning that race. But I shattered my derailleur at the last 50 meters. I came around a turn, I stood up to sprint, and there was so much mud caked on my bike. It pulled the derailleur off and just shattered it. So at that point, I had to pick up my bike, run across the
finish line.
Yeah, because luckily it was at the finish. But yeah, and I finished that race just covered head to toe in mud and freezing and exhausted. But it was just a good time. It was just crazy conditions. I like crazy conditions.
Yeah.
I love epic conditions.
See, I think of that as like the type 2 fun where I'm miserable while it's happening, which I've never experienced what you experienced, but you're just like, this is dumb. I will never ride a bike again. I can't stand it, blah, blah. And then, you know, by the time you like take a shower and get a good night's sleep, you're like, actually that was pretty cool.
There's always a dark moment in every race.
Yes.
I always have a stretch in every single race where truly you're suffering so hard and your body hurts so bad and you're just mentally and physically over it. But I have to say, like, one of the things I think about my early years is that, you know, I find any amount of physical suffering more tolerable than that mental suffering. You know, I can suffer physical things, but there's a threshold of like mental stress that you just can't take anymore. And having been there, I think that physical stuff, it doesn't seem so bad. It seems manageable.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned mental stress. And that brings me to my next question, which it probably was not mental stress for you. But if somebody told me, or somebody did tell me that you spoke at the UN.
Yeah.
And I'm going to just say, like, talk about mental stress. Like, tell us about that. Because I can't even envision it.
So there was this campaign to create World Bicycle Day, which is a movement that began actually with a professor at a college, I think, in Tennessee. But the UN eventually took it up, and there became this World Bicycle Day. And so they invited all these people to the UN, all these different organizations, People for Bikes and other bike advocacy groups, and myself and a couple of my teammates. And we had the opportunity to address the UN General Assembly and all of these other organizations. Yeah, and it was crazy. It was, you know, you're walking into I'm wheeling bicycles into the United Nations.
That is just mind-blowing.
Yeah, and we had our mascot there. We have the team mascot, which is Billy the Bull. And we have this, you know, mascot at the UN. And it It was odd, and it was, I mean, again, like you talk about those moments in life that are just surreal. You know, I have a lot of those moments with this team where you look around and you're like, how did I get here? You know, how did the stars align for this? And that's definitely one of those moments.
Yeah. Well, I definitely feel like you've earned it.
I mean,
the story that you're telling is mind-blowing in itself.
You know, I think the great thing about my team is that it isn't so much about diabetes, right? Like, it's really about people have challenges because we all have them. And it's really a story about having those obstacles and making a decision. And this is really the story of cycling. I mean, there are challenges in life you choose, like going out and doing a gravel race, or, you know, and then there are challenges that you don't. And the question is how you approach them and how you feel about them and what you do with them. And I think the story of my team is really that it's a bunch of people who had these obstacles and had these challenges and instead found ways to use them as motivating factors to do something different and better and to inspire other people to do the same. And, you know, my son, like I said, he has autism, and he never paid too much attention to cycling, but I would catch him every once in a while Googling the team or Googling me, which is kind of a weird thing to watch your kids do. And he fell in love with one of our now retired riders, this guy Javier Mejias. And Javi is just a great guy, just the nicest guy you've ever met. And Javi's last race was USA Pro Challenge, the old race that used to happen in Colorado. And he's racing with Jens Voigt, who's a legend in cycling.
Oh, my, yeah.
And it was Javi and Jens lap after lap on the last stage of USA Pro Challenge, the two of them neck and neck. And my little son, 9-year-old Henry, is on the barriers, just banging on those barriers, screaming for Javi. And when this race is done, the CEO of the team, Phil Sutherland, who I've known forever, and he's the best guy you could hope to know, comes up to my son, and he's trying very hard to talk to Henry because he's really making an effort with this kid. And Henry, halfway through, just stops and he's like, Phil, I just want to talk to Javi.
Aww.
And so Phil grabs him by the hand, takes him down to the team bus, and Javier emerges with his race numbers and hands them to my son. And my son put those numbers on his backpack and rode around the whole neighborhood with those numbers on his backpack for the longest time. And someone once asked him why he had those numbers, and he said, well, if my mom and her friends can race with diabetes, I can race a bike with autism.
Wow.
And
that gives me the goosebumps.
That's what I mean. I think it's a story really about, you know, reaching further, and I hope that's the message that we convey. I hope it's more global than diabetes. Like, diabetes definitely matters. I mean, on a personal level, very much.
Right.
But I think that everyone's going to have challenges. I work with, I also do a lot of advocacy for a group called Go for Graham, which is a mental health advocacy that is all about shedding the stigma of mental health conditions. And I think, you know, everyone is going to confront something, whether it's depression or autism or diabetes or, you know, pick a thing. You know, we're all going to run headlong into something.
Wow. I'm amazed at your story and everything about you. Like, this is so awesome.
I'm actually not that impressive. I just kind of hang out. I hang out in Iowa and ride some bikes.
But I think I wanted to kind of ask if there's anybody you wanted to give a shout out, whether it's your team or somebody that got you into, understanding, like maybe that doctor or somebody like that. But before we do that, I do feel like we need to give a shout out to Pat Mayben, who's sitting with us. Because he's the reason that we're even sitting here talking and the reason that we were able to meet. Because he is Mr. Party Pat from Primal, and we both got to hang out at the Primal booth all weekend and just help out at Jingle Cross in the UCI World. So, Pat, we need to say thank you to you.
Oh, I appreciate it, Murph. I'm also emotional hearing this story. I've heard Becky's story, bits and pieces of it before, but to hear it all knit together at the same time is really moving for me as well. And I'm blessed to know both of you.
We're blessed, too.
I love Pat.
I know.
Pat and I have been friends for a lot of years. We've traveled together. He's been my often travel partner. And he puts up with every second of it just so graciously. And, he knows all the good places to eat because he travels the whole country.
He's everywhere.
He is my tour guide. Every time I go anywhere, I send him a message like, okay, tell me what's the restaurant. And he has yet to steer me wrong,
That's
My
awesome.
kids, my daughter once called him and asked him how to make mac and cheese when she was home alone.
Oh,
They know him as Uncle Pat.
yeah, that's awesome.
She called him on his birthday to wish Uncle Pat a happy birthday.
That's awesome.
But that's cycling, right? Like that's
Right.
cycling, and that's the community. My kids have grown up in this community, and my daughter, my 6-foot-tall daughter, has this amazing sense of self, and she doesn't have the kind of body consciousness that you see with 13-year-old girls. And people always ask me what I did, and I was like, I raised her in cycling. She's seen people of every body type do incredible things. She's got all these wonderfully supportive people around her, and she's not really focused on an aesthetic. She sees what human beings can do athletically, and that's really, she's more interested in how fast she can run or how fast she can ride her bike than how long her legs are, how tall she is. And it's great. It's fantastic. And I think I think that's really, like, the cycling community is just a really healthy, sort of vibrant place with a lot of great people.
Yeah. And I think that there's really no end in sight. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes when you have the pro racers that are really popular, something as they, age out or something like that, but there's always somebody behind. And it's kind of like your point about your organization, your team is grooming younger riders so that hopefully there is cycling to continue.
This weekend, the high five I gave as he was coming across the line was to Gage Hecht, who I knew Gage when he was 12 years old. He and I would show up at races, and he was this, junior rider on junior gears on a kid's bike, warming up on a trainer with his dad. And he is on his way to Rally Pro Cycling next season. And it's unreal to watch these kids come through the ranks and grow up. And it's just amazing.
Awesome. Pat's showing us a photo of you giving a high five.
Yeah.
That's so awesome. Yeah.
But there's always someone behind. It's that, I think, is actually the cool thing about having done this so long, is that I get to see those kids come up.
Yeah. And anybody you want to give a shout out to, whether it's a team or a person, before we close this out?
There are a lot of people who have opened doors for me. There are a lot of people who have given me some incredible opportunities. Dave Edwards at Primal has certainly worked hard to open doors for me, and we've talked about maybe doing some work in women's development. And you have to be careful what you say around Dave, because you mentioned that, and he's like full on ready to go, like ready to do it tomorrow. And I'm like, whoa. We got to make a plan. But he's been just a great supporter of myself, and actually of a lot of really important organizations too. That Primalwear does a lot of great work in the cycling space. And then, Phil Sutherland, the CEO of Team Noro Nordisk. Phil has opened doors not just for me, but for a lot of people. There was a moment at team training camp last year where we were all sitting around talking about how we ended up with the team. And all of it really boiled down to Phil Sutherland and what that organization has given to all of us and to our families is really hard to imagine. It's just an incredible opportunity. It's the opportunity of a lifetime. Diabetes is truly the greatest thing that ever happened to me, which is a weird thing to say.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah.
And that is all credit to Phil Sutherland, who is just an amazing person and continues to do really, really great things for diabetes and for cycling, and just in his own community. He is an incredibly generous person. So, I'm grateful. I've had a lot. I got here because a lot of people threw open the doors to opportunity, and had they not, I would not have made it. And I am truly, I think about those people all the time.
But truly, it had to come back to the persona, the psyche that you present. The energy that you give out. People want to make changes and help you, so that it's right. Right back at you.
Well, and I hope I'm doing it for someone else. I hope I'm opening those doors for all the people behind me, right?
Yeah.
I think that should be all of our role.
For sure, yeah. Well, Becky, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And, we've already thanked Pat for allowing us to meet this weekend and work hard at Jingle Cross and get full of gravel and have fun and sell a lot of puzzles. But anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you for spending 4 full days with me.
And now we're out of Prosecco, so we might have to switch to something else, I guess. But anyway, thank you so much. Well, listeners, that's it for this week. Thanks, Becky, for taking the time to chat, and a huge thanks to Primalwear and Pat Mayben for connecting us while we were at the UCI World Cup in Iowa City. Becky is someone I am so happy to have met. www.teamnoronordisk.com is the website to learn more about Becky, or follow her at Girls to the Front on Instagram. Email me at morphologypodcast@gmail.com if you have a topic or the name of a cyclist you find interesting. Support my podcast at patreon.com/morphology. Visit my Instagram page for daily entertainment, and check out my website for all kinds of bicycle stuff. And a quick shout out to Simmons Electric for sponsoring this podcast. I'll leave you with this quote from the Unwritten Book of Morphology. This quote comes from Simone Biles. "I'd rather regret the risk that didn't work out than the chances I didn't take at all." Think about it.